sermon I ever preached was on the book of Job, which was one of the dumber things I've probably ever done. Because, a 20-year-old knows enough about suffering to tell you all about it. I hadn't preached a sermon on Job since that day, I don't think. But I want to tell you, that sermon was awful. Some of you are in this room were there, and I hope you don't remember it. I hope it's news to you that I preached that sermon. Here was my suffering. I was about 20 when I preached it. 5 years before, I was about to be a driver. And, we had a 1992 Dodge minivan at home. And a little paint peeling off of the hood. You filled it up with oil every time you put gas in it. One of those kind of red velvet interior that you would love. And that was going to be my car driving as a 15-year-old. And I was like, Mom, do you want me to be single forever? Is that how this works? And I was such a fool, such a fool, because that was my illustration of suffering as a 20-year-old guy. And I was preaching to a group of people that I'd grown up with. They were, they helped raise me, and they had lost loved ones, spouses, kids, a lot of things near and dear to them. And I'm telling them how bad it is to have to drive a vehicle when you're 16. Such a fool. I've done a lot of dumb things. That may have been one of the dumber ones as a preacher. I'm 39. I'm not 20 anymore, but I still am not all that prepared to talk to you about suffering, because some of you in this room right now, listening wherever you listen, have suffered more than I have. There's no doubt about it. Some of you are suffering more than I am. But yet, this is Scripture. It's wisdom. It's something that we need to address. It is a strange story. And so today, we will not so much talk about the suffering of Job, but the response to the suffering of Job. Both his response and the response of the people who are his friends. And they're not fake friends. Let's be clear. We're going to talk about some folks in Job's life that are friends, that are probably good folks. That's kind of the picture that we have. But their response to his suffering, to me, is a bit strange. We learn a lot about Job in 2 verses. We learn in verse 1, there's a man from Uz whose name is Job. And we learned that he is 4 things. Job is blameless, and he's upright, he fears God, and he turns away from evil. So you tell me, has Job done anything wrong? Yes or no? No. Job is blameless. Has Job done anything wrong? Has Job done anything that he should be blamed for? No. The answer is no to all of these questions. The answer is yes. Job is a man of integrity. He's a man of uprightness. He fears God. He turns away from evil. He has done nothing wrong. In fact, if we were going to read every verse of the first 2 chapters, you would read 3 times. One from the narrator that Job is blameless, twice from God himself saying to the adversary that Job is blameless. He's upright. He fears God. He shuns evil. That is who Job is, okay? Now our test, the test of his friends in life, our test in life is, can we see people suffer and resist the temptation to assume that something is wrong in their life, to assume, to accuse them of some kind of wrongdoing? Can we see suffering in life and refuse to make somebody a scapegoat? Can we go through hard times, things we don't explain, and feel like we got to explain it away anyway? That is, I will call it, a satanic temptation. Can we avoid that? And here's why I will say that it is satanic. Because in the next verse, after Lynn read the first 5, let's pick up at verse 6. Job chapter 1, verse 6. There was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Now, let me stop here real quick. We have in our Bibles, maybe, the word Satan. In my Bible, it's capital. In the original ancient Hebrew, there's a definite article in front of it. It is actually the Satan, the Satan. And the word just means accuser, someone who brings an accusation against somebody else, an adversary, something like that. And so the scene that we have here is God is holding court, his counsel, and this being, the Satan, walks in. In verse 7, the Lord says to Satan, "From where have you come?" And Satan answers the Lord and says, from going to and fro on the earth, walking up and down on it, just patrolling pretty much, looking for folks that I can trip up. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him, blameless, upright, fears God, and turns away from evil. Has Job done anything wrong? No. Job is blameless. He's done nothing wrong. He's good. He's upright. There's nobody else like him, God says. He's far past anybody else on the earth. That's what God says. Well, Satan says to God, yeah, but there's got to be something in it for him, right? Job's not serving you for nothing. It's a question, does Job serve you for nothing? But it's an accusing question, right? He thinks the answer is, there's got to be something. You built a hedge around him. He's got thousands and thousands of flocks and herds. He's got a great family. He's got his health. Surely Job is serving you because of what you were doing for him. And so God says, okay, well, look, consider him. Stretch out your hand on all that he's got, and you can try that. All that he has is in your hand, God says. Don't stretch out your hand on his health yet, all right? And so Satan does that. And before you know it, Job has lost just about everything that was near and dear to him. His possessions, his flocks, his herds, his wealth. He went from wealth to nothing in a day. It's not just that. Went from a man who had 10 children, 7 sons, 3 daughters, to a man who has no kids. They were doing what they customarily do, having a get-together at somebody's house, and then they all died. And so the messenger comes, and Job goes out, and he's sorrowful, he's suffering. But in verse 22, in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Well, in the next chapter, in chapter 2, Satan has his hand at Job's health. He strikes him, afflicts him, and Job develops these boils all over his skin, and he's sitting there trying to scratch himself with broken pottery. It's not a good deal. His voice is cracking, you know. It's not a good deal. And then his friends show up, and for 7 days, they seem to be really good friends. They sit around, they don't say a word, they're present with Job, they're right there with him in his affliction, and they're not even the first ones that speak up. In chapter 3, Job starts to curse the day that he was born. He curses his whole existence, wishes that he had never been brought upon the earth. Let's look at the end of that chapter, chapter 3, verse 25. Job says, the thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. I'm not at ease. I'm not quiet. I've got no rest, but trouble comes. That's his life. Today, it may be yours. It may be the life of somebody that you love, somebody that you care about, somebody that's near and dear to you. That is Job's life. Has Job done anything wrong? No. Job is blameless. He's upright. He fears God. He shuns evil. That is who Job is. He has done nothing wrong. He's got 3 friends. They're there with him, silent for a week. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. In chapter 4, they begin to speak up. And at this point, the relationships change. First, it's going to be Eliphaz. And I'd like for you to look at a couple of verses from Eliphaz's first speech. This is how this works, and by the way. They're going to speak in rotation. The friends will say something about Job, about his affliction, and Job will respond. What you'll see is that the friends accuse Job, and then Job defends himself. And so, chapter 4, verse 1, this is Eliphaz. Look at what he says in verse 7. He says, Job, remember this. Who that was innocent ever perished? Or where were the upright cut off? Now let me ask you, so far in this story, who has perished? It's not Job. It's not Job's wife. It's Job's children who have perished. Do you see what Eliphaz is doing here? Job, there's got to be something else going on here. Your kids, the innocent don't die. The upright are not destroyed. Something's going on here, Job. Maybe they're a little bit guilty. In chapter 5, here's what he says in verse 17. Behold, blessed is the one that God reproves. Thanks, Wes. Believe me, I get tired of saying it like this just as much as you get tired of hearing it. Blessed is the one that God reproves. That's true, right? Blessed is the one that God reproves. Despise not the discipline of the Almighty. That's true. But in this context, it's an accusation. All right, Eliphaz is accusing Job and Job's children of doing wrong, of being evil, of sinning. All right, let's look at how Job responds. Chapter 6, verse 14. We're going to look at a lot of verses here in Job. Picking them out here. Job says, you know, he who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty. Job says, you know, you've come accusing me and bringing all these charges against me, but you're not being kind at all. Where's the kindness in this? He says in verse 21, you have now become nothing. You see my calamity and you are afraid. You see what happens to me and it causes you fear. And here's why I think that is. Because Eliphaz has this system of belief where he thinks good people get good things and bad people get bad things. And he says, Job, like your kids died. They must have had some bad in their life. The upright don't perish, remember? And Job says, you got it wrong. You see how my family has suffered and you know how good of a man I am, Job says. And it brings you fear. Because if this is what I get, what do you think may be coming to you? He says in verse 29, please turn, stop. You've accused me over and over and over again. Please stop what you're doing. Let no injustice be done. Turn, my vindication is at stake. He says in chapter 7, verse 11, I will not restrain my mouth. I'll speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. But he does not admit wrongdoing. Okay? This is human emotion. Right? This is Job speaking out of his pain and his suffering. But he's not guilty. He's blameless. He's upright. He fears God. He shuns evil. That's who Job is. What we can see is that Satan may have disappeared from the book in name in chapter 2. But his spirit lives on in the friends of Job every time they make an accusation against him. They accuse him. They think he's wrong. They assume his guilt. That is not the work of God. That is the work of Satan. And that is something for us to think about, I think, today. Well, that's friend number one. We're going to come back to him. Job's got a second friend. His name is Bildad. We meet him in chapter 8. So chapter 8, verse 1. Now what Eliphaz implies, Bildad says very openly. Look at this. Can you imagine somebody talking like this to Job? He says in verse 2, how long will you say these things and defend yourself? That's what he's saying. And the words of your mouth be a great wind. He says, Job, does God pervert justice? They got what was coming to them. Does God pervert justice, or does the Almighty pervert what's right? Verse 4, if your children have sinned against him, then he has just delivered them into the hand of their transgression. Job's blameless. He's upright. He fears God. He shuns evil. He makes sacrifices for his kids. Not saying they've done wrong, but he makes sacrifices just in case they have. And his friend Bildad comes and says, your kids deserved whatever they got. They got what was coming to them. That's what happens here. Bildad has a theology of recompense, where you get what you deserve all the time. That the good get good, the bad get bad, and that's just how life works. Job will respond. Chapter 9, verse 21. He says, I'm blameless. God said it. The narrator said it. Job says it. I am blameless. I regard not myself. He says, I loathe my life. Chapter 10, verse 1. I loathe my life. I'll give free utterance to my complaint. I'll speak in the bitterness of my soul. Human emotion. He's got a third friend. This third friend is named Zophar. And we'll meet Zophar in the next chapter, chapter 11, verse 1. Notice how he presumes Job's guilt and brings these accusations against him. It's terrible. He says, should a multitude of words, those are Job's words, Job's defending himself words, should a multitude of words go unanswered, and a man full of talk be judged right? Should your babble, the man's lost his family, he's lost everything, and his friend says, you're just babbling on about all this stuff. Stop. Should your babble silence men? And when you mock, shall no one shame you? You say, my doctrine is pure and I'm clean in God's eyes. Oh, that God would speak and open his lips to you. Zophar comes and presumes Job's guilt. And he says, Job, you're mocking God. You're going to keep mocking God. You're going to get worse stuff that's coming down the line to you. And he says, whatever shame you've got, Job, you deserve every bit of it. You've brought it upon yourself. Your family has brought it upon themselves. You're getting what is due. Chapter 12, Job responds. He says in verses 1 through 4, you bunch of know-it-alls. You think you got it all figured out? He says, I've got understanding in verse 3 as well as you do. I'm not inferior. Who doesn't know such things? But I'm a laughingstock to all my friends, he says. I, who called to God, and he answered me, just and blameless man, I'm a laughingstock. And he's right. Job is blameless. Job is upright. Job is a man of integrity. He is just, loves God, fears God, shuns evil, and he's a laughingstock in his friends' eyes. Chapter 15, we meet Eliphaz again. We're going to skip forward a little bit. Eliphaz says in verse 4, Job, you are doing away with the fear of God. You're hindering meditation before God. You are keeping us from being right with God. In response to this, Job says in chapter 16, verse 2, I've heard many such things. Miserable comforters are you all. Shall windy words have an end? Or what provokes you that you answer? Miserable bunch of comforters they are. They're torturing him, they're crushing him, they're insulting him. I want you to go see what happens in verse 22 from our friend Eliphaz. This may be one of the most destructive things in the entire book. He has condemned Job. He has blamed Job. He's blamed Job's kids for everything that has been brought to them. And then in verse 4, is it for your fear of him that he reproves you and enters into judgment with you? Job, is not your evil abundant? There's no end to your iniquities. Do you see how this is escalating? It's growing in Eliphaz's mind. The accusations are becoming stronger. All right, what he might have thought a little bit at the beginning is now given birth to a full-fledged indictment of Job as a monster. That's how this grows. There's no end to your sin. You have exacted pledges of your brothers for nothing. You've stripped the naked of their clothing. No, he hasn't. Job is just. He's blameless. He's upright. And Eliphaz says, you're stealing the poor's clothing. You're taking food off their table. You, verse 7, you've given no water to the weary to drink. You've withheld bread from the hungry. No, he hasn't. He's done absolutely none of that. His friends don't have the Spirit of God. They have the spirit of the accuser. And their accusations of Job are growing. The man with power possessed the land. The favored man lived in it. You, Job, you sent widows away empty, and the arms of the fatherless were crushed. Those are the great commands of the Old Testament. Care for the widow and the fatherless. Job, you violated them. That's why you're suffering. That's why you are no longer a father. That's why you've lost your children. Job's a monster in the eyes of his friends. Okay, let's go to chapter 31. Job will defend his innocence. Verse 16. He says, if I have withheld anything that the poor desired, or if I've caused the eyes of the widow to fail, if I've eaten my morsel alone and the fatherless has not eaten of it, For from my youth, the fatherless grew up with me as with a father, and from my mother's womb I guided the window. Job says, I've done none of this. I'm innocent, blameless. I'm right. I'm just. I fear God and I shun evil. But if I missed something along the way, I'm sorry for that. Verse 38, if my land has cried out against me, its furrows have wept together. If I've eaten its yield without payment and made its owners breathe their last, let thorns grow instead of wheat. Let me be cursed. Foul weeds instead of barley. And the words of Job are ended. Pretty much. We'll see a few more words of Job in chapter 42. But that's the story. What a strange story it is. What a terrible story. Man is just, he's blameless, he's upright. Man is fearing God and shunning evil. Man is caring about people around him, and all he's got are a bunch of miserable, comforting friends who come and say, well, Job, good people get good stuff. And your life is awful, and so you must be a pretty bad person. And Job, bad people get bad stuff. That's how God works, they say. And so you must have some awful things in your life for you to have this kind of suffering. And Job says through the whole thing, no, I don't. I'm blameless. The narrator told you, God said it twice, I am blameless and innocent. This is a story of blame. And this is what I want us to get out of this. This is a story of blame. Job is a blameless man. But we are tempted along the way to think that he's not. We are tempted along the way to think that something is wrong in Job's life, and that's the cause of all the problems that he's got. We are tempted in our lives to assume things about other people when they are met with tragedy and destruction and hard times, that they've got something wrong in their life, that they deserve what they've got. And I got to tell you this morning, that is not a godly way to think of God. That is a satanic way to think of God. That's the spirit of the accuser, not the spirit of God. Job is blameless, but Job is blamed by his friends for all of these things that he's not done. He's blamed by his friends. But in the end, if you look in chapter 42, he does not return their blame upon themselves. He repents before God, probably of his certainty of how he thought the universe worked. But then I want us to pick up at verse 7. After the Lord had spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, my anger burns against you and against your two friends. For you, not Job, you and your two friends have not spoken of me what is right. You were wrong, he says, about how the universe works. You were wrong about how I work, God says. You were wrong. Job was right. Now, therefore, take 7 bulls, 7 rams, go to my servant Job, and offer up a burnt offering for yourselves. And my servant Job, this is powerful, my servant Job will pray for you, and I will accept his prayer, not to deal with you according to your folly. You've not spoken of me what is right. Whatever you read in the book of Job, coming from the words of Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar about God, it was not right. That is not how God works. Job was not punished because of great sin or iniquity in his life. Job was blameless, upright, feared God, shunned evil. Job questions, why is it like this? He laments his situation. He suffers, and he does want to know why. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't I? I think so. But in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with evil. Chapter 1, verse 22. He just wants to know why. In the end, Job doesn't get an answer. Job invites the question of how God runs the universe. Is it just? Is it fair? Do the good get good? Do the bad get bad? And in the end, I'm not sure that Job gets the answer that he wants. But he does learn something about the wisdom of God. He learns that the universe is run by the wisdom of God, and he can't understand how it all works. There is a passage in Job chapter 19 that I'd like to leave you with. Job 19, verses 25 through 27. This I think, is Job's great moment of faith. Job 19, verse 25. I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin, sick Job says, after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I'll see God. Whom shall I see for myself? And my eyes shall behold, and not another. My heart faints within me. Through it all, Job is blameless, upright, he's just, he's a man of integrity. He fears God, he shuns evil. And he says, I know that my Redeemer lives. It's a great moment of faith where Job seems to back away and trust in God's wisdom in running the world, even though he doesn't understand how the whole thing works. That, in my opinion, is one of the more difficult things that we'll ever be asked to do. Those are the times whenever something bad happens, tragedy strikes us, people that we know, people that we're friends with, and we feel like we got to explain it. Can I tell you this morning that we're not going to explain it? And we feel like we got to say something that's going to make somebody feel better, and most of the time, we're going to have a hard time doing that. And tragedy strikes, and we want to, I think, maybe defend God in this. Why would God allow this? Why would God bring this? Those are the questions that we talk about. Those are the questions that Job has. And he doesn't get an answer to why. But he does have faith that says, I know that my Redeemer lives, and somehow we're going to stand together. Somehow this is going to be all right. Sometimes in life, we are Job. Sometimes in life, we are the one who suffers. We're the one who struggles. Sometimes in life, the best we can do is trust that God is wise, that God is good, and that one day it's going to be okay. Sometimes that's the best we can do. Sometimes we're Job. And sometimes we're his friends. And this is when it's tough for us, I think. Because a friend, we feel like we need to say something and do something to make it better. And it's not going to be made better. Or we need to say something to explain it. This is the platitudes. God's will. God's got a plan. Maybe God needed, fill in the blank. It's not the Bible that I read. Job actually says about their platitudes, those are weak. Can we leave the platitudes at home? Job's friends were at their best when they sat there present with him in the middle of his suffering. That was when they were at their best. When they opened their mouths and began to speak about how they saw the world and explain away these things, that's when they became, in Job's words, miserable comforters. Sometimes we're Job's friends. And we're around the person who's suffering. Tragedy has struck. Things have been destroyed. Can we leave here agreeing that we're not going to blame the blameless and assume guilt about people that we don't know much about? And attach wrongdoing to people that we've just heard? Can I tell you that's not the work of God? That's the work of the accuser, the one who's labeled the Satan in chapter 1 and chapter 2. We don't want to be about his work. We want to be about the work of God. God said Job was blameless, upright, just man, fears God, shuns evil. The accuser and Job's good buddies said, we're not so sure about that. Can we follow the direction of God and not the accuser? Several centuries later, there'd be another blameless man who was blamed by others. I bet you know his name. This blameless man who was blamed by others, he gave God his complaints. We see that in the Garden of Gethsemane. That blameless man who was blamed by others, he also had to deal with the accuser, the Satan, entering into the lives of his friends and tormenting him around the last table and deceiving one another and denying him in his moment of weakness. That other blameless man who was blamed by others, he too prayed for others in the middle of his suffering. Prayed that they would return. That although Satan has asked for them to sift them as wheat, to shake them out and to get them to run away, that they'd come back and they would feed us. That same blameless man who was blamed by others, like Job, redeems his friend, redeems us. Suffering will come to us. Suffering will come to people that we know. Maybe it's today. Maybe it's down the road a piece. We don't know. But suffering will come. Sometimes we are Job. Sometimes we are his friends. But the question of Job is, who do we blame when things go bad? Where do we place blame when times are tough? I know where God placed it. I know where Job seems to place it. And unfortunately, I know where his friends seem to place the blame. They placed it on Job. But better than all that, we know where Jesus seemed to place the blame. In the Gospels, when Jesus would encounter someone who was suffering, pain, hardship, sickness, infirmity, affliction, he would sometimes say, this person has been bound by Satan, by the accuser. This woman's been bound by Satan for 18 years. He seemed to think that a lot of people were bound by the strong man, Satan. And he saw his work as coming to unbind them. And so in the words of Job, I know in the middle of suffering, in the middle of my friends who are suffering, in the middle of people who are dealing with hardships today, I know that my Redeemer lives. I don't know a whole lot about it. I don't know a whole lot about how the universe works and why bad things happen to good people. I don't know a whole lot about that, but I know that my Redeemer lives, and one day we'll stand together. And I know that because one day God has promised that he will set all things right for all of us. The ultimate blameless one who was blamed by others will reconcile all things to himself and make peace. He's not to blame. The one who's making peace is not to blame. The one who's reconciling all things to himself is not to blame. It's the adversary. It's the roaring lion. It's the Satan. When bad things happen to people we like, to people like us, to people not like us, where will we place the blame? Maybe you're here today and you too know that your Redeemer lives. And there's suffering, there's hardship, there's pain. But redemption is there. It's the promise of God. Forgiveness is the promise of God. Reconciliation is the promise of God. And so maybe you're here today and you're ready to become a Christian. You're ready to follow the example of Jesus, the words of Jesus, the path of Jesus. You're ready to be baptized into water this day, united with his death, to put off the old and begin to put on the new. Maybe that's you today. Maybe you're here and you're a Christian, but you got questions. We've said from this stage many times that God does not ridicule honest doubts and questions. And so maybe you've got questions about why life is painful and hurtful sometimes. Maybe you recognize in yourself that you've placed blame in the wrong place. Maybe you've blamed others when the focus of our blame should be on the adversary, Satan. Or you've blamed God when the blame is really due to go to the adversary, the enemy, the accuser. And so maybe you've been a Christian for some time now, but you still struggle with these questions. Where do we put the blame? Maybe there's something else going on in your life, some way that we can help you in your journey to walk with Jesus every day of your life. If so, why don't you come now while we stand and sing this song?